One of the things that I am hoping as you live your life is I know that you will end up facing difficulty. I know that you will face uncertainty. I know that there are things that have gone on that are being trumpeted in the press, in the media, and around us. And I know that in journalism, they have a saying, and the saying is, if it bleeds, it leads, which means that journalistic organizations tend to find the most horrifying news and make sure it gets the most amount of coverage. So I'm not going to have to encourage you to go and find difficulty, because difficulty, to be really honest, comes and finds us on a pretty regular basis. But here's my hope for you. My hope for you is in the midst of the life that you are leading and in the midst of the responsibilities that you bear and in the midst of the burdens that you sometimes carry, I am hoping that you are going to find joy, that you are going to find delight, that you are going to find fun, that you are going to find things that make life worth living. And I know there's a very strong sense in terms of the biblical faith, of the importance of being responsible. There's a very strong sense in the biblical faith of the sayings of the Proverbs, which remind us to live a responsible life. But one of the things that happens in the example of Messiah Yeshua is in the Gospels, you find Yeshua telling puns. And sometimes the puns that Yeshua tells, in English they're not actually puns, but in biblical languages, some of the puns work in Aramaic, some of the puns work in Hebrew, some of the puns work in Greek. And it is the belief of many scholars that Yeshua was probably at least trilingual and spoke those languages and operated in those languages. But the whole idea that Yeshua found joy in the life that he lived, his ministry was not long. It's presumed to be at least 3 years and maybe up to 4 to 5 years. But Yeshua had a ministry that was relatively short. He had a ministry where the entire hanging of the fate of civilization moving forward depended upon Yeshua doing that ministry accurately, correctly, and in a fashion where his disciples would be prepared to move it forward. But with Yeshua's personality, as we see in the Gospels, with the account of his life, with the time that he spent with those whom he loved, it is obvious that this is a man who had a sense of humor. This is a man who delighted in creation. This is a man who ended up delighting in relationships. And this is a man who truly ended up being loved by his students and by those who were close to him. If you have a sense of humor, it will lighten the load for the people around you. If you have a sense of really enjoying discovering new things and sharing what you discover, it will take the burden off those who are immediately around you. I had a dear friend who moved out of the area where I live currently to another state, and he was the prince of puns. And he would end up being in the midst of a conversation, and you could see the gears moving in his head as he was preparing to move the conversation in a fashion where a pun would be set up. And as a tennis player, he would take a racket and he would slam over the top of the conversation a pun that would drive a point home. And his wife would groan whenever he made a pun. But at the same time that she groaned, you could see that she was totally entertained by what he had done. And she didn't want to encourage him, but he knew she enjoyed it. She knew she enjoyed it. And those who ended up getting to know them both well knew that they both enjoyed this aspect of their relationship that had gone back to when they were very young people. So I hope that in the midst of your developing who you are, that you're not going to just be severe, that you're not going to just be someone who suffers. You're not going to just be a person who is grim. But I hope that there's going to be aspects of your joyfulness that's going to break through. I hope there's going to be aspects of your appreciation for humor. I hope that if you are good with words, perhaps you will use puns, you will use metaphors, you will use similes, you will use language in a fashion that is colorful, that gives people an opportunity to think and gives opportunity for parallelisms to stack on top of each other. Because this world can be difficult, this world can be hard, but God has given us an intelligence that in a small fashion mirrors who He is, so that we can have a broad range of wonderful things that go on, ways to delight, ways to encourage, ways to enjoy, and ways to make people who are not simply anxious or depressed or upset, but people who truly also can live through this life, even if it's missing the perfection that God originally intended to build into it because of our sin and because of our fall. And that your encouragement, that your joy, that your having these tools will end up pointing people to God and pointing people to the utopia that in their hearts they know they want, but that can only be met in God's new creation and in God's heaven and in the things that we are being prepared for now, but that are promised to us and coming in a life past what we can currently perceive. Shalom.